All right. So, welcome everybody to another edition, another episode of Optimizing Live. Today, we're going to continue our conversation around AI blockers. We run a series of polls, gather a little bit of data and insight, and we're going to be talking about what we've learned from this. Today, we're joined by special guest Dan Graham. Dan is the founder of the AI Product Guild. So, thanks for joining us today, Dan.
Thanks, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So we've been having this running conversation around AI blockers, which I think is really interesting and hopefully driving a lot of thought out there. So Randy, we've got a couple of rounds of doing the poll. We've been engaging in some of this conversation. So as I asked last time, so what are we learning about what organizations are experiencing when it comes to trying to roll out AI in their organizations?
Yeah, we're learning a couple things that are not surprising for those of us who have been in the game of helping organizations improve performance for 12 plus years at this point. And that is that most of our organizational systems are not built to deliver the kind of results that ultimately we're after. And the thing that came out as our number one blocker, which is near and dear to my heart, always a favorite area to focus conversations with clients on, is governance. And governance not as one thing. Governance, as you can appreciate, is multifaceted. There's a lot of different elements to governance, but I think the biggest challenge that most organizations are facing is we're still dealing with this legacy debt, 50 plus years of how are technology organizations designed. You go back to the 70s and technology was a cost center, and everything that was part of how technology operated back in the 70s and 80s was really focused on how do we optimize for cost, not how do we optimize for speed to market, for customer value, and we're still paying the price for those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but governance, compliance, risk management, if we're going to bundle all of those together, I mean, their job is to protect the organization from threats and risks.
Right.
And so it's natural that the kind of the mindset and the processes and everything else that goes along with that is something that needs to be navigated, whether we're talking about adopting AI or trying to do anything that's innovative in an organization. So yeah. It's not a big surprise to me either, but I think, sometimes we look at governance as this big monolithic, intractable thing. And again, the idea of it being a blocker seems to be a little short-sighted. So what do we think about how organizations need to, navigate that going forward?
Yeah, my take on that is if governance feels like it's slowing you down, like that's all the indication that you need that there's improvements to be made. And it's not about stripping the purpose or the intent of governance.
Yeah.
I like the analogy. There's a visual somewhere that shows like a busy intersection with a roundabout, and they're like, good governance feels like it's there to help you navigate safely and quickly through the risks and challenges that face you. But a lot of organizations, there's some balancing to be done there. And I think the biggest recommendation that I would have is start with one thing. What's the smallest thing? That it's a complex, interconnected set of things that you're trying to manage. You can't just go back to the drawing board and re-architect your entire governance model from scratch. You can. I wouldn't recommend that. Figure out what's the one thing. What are the one source of inertia or friction, and how do we do one small thing to go after that and improve that? And the more organizations build that muscle to repeatedly sort of peel back some of the layers that are slowing things down, I think building that muscle and that capability is really just as important as the impact of streamlining and improving governance in and of itself.
Yeah. So Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. Governance is certainly key to this. Good governance, I would say. MIT study came out recently. I think it said 92% of businesses are investing in AI, and we've got about 8% of those actually scaling. Where I think a lot of people fall down is in the data governance. But more than that, it's treated as an isolated experiment. So, it lacks the ability to run across different departments, usually starts in IT or software development engineering. But really a lot of the value comes from implementing this for business users. And if they're not included, often the success metric for this is, a successful demo, not a successful implementation. Also, a lot of these projects get saddled on top of daily chores and activities of a worker who's often operating at 110% already. So you pile on another project on top of them that doesn't feel critical. It gets those demos, those pilots don't necessarily have to be successful. I think you get a lot of key learnings from just doing, and people and organizations get a little bit shy that they won't have a successful demo, and that will be unsuccessful. I think an unsuccessful demo is successful in the key learnings that you do. But there's bottlenecks around unclear ownership, lack of talent, and proper allocation of time and focus to execute these. The technology adoption usually goes through a maturity curve. You start at 0 and you get to 5 mastery, and there's distinct steps that you can take through that process. That includes good governance. It includes establishing a vision, a way to measure success, KPIs, and even AI could be very helpful in measuring those KPIs. But you need leadership buy-in. This needs to be not just an adjunct project on top of everything else that you're doing. I think that the world has changed from the information age to the thinking age, and this is quickly becoming a competitive necessity. So lean in.
Yeah. Well, Dan just unloaded a whole lot of things that get me going in terms of what's really behind the mindset of what's going on in these organizations. So I love how you characterize that, Dan, of whether you call it a pilot, an experiment, or a demo. They tend to get isolated, and they also turn into, I love how you phrase it, if you succeed in that, how is that going to be perceived in the organization? And I see this all the time of, organizations talk a good game about learning and continuing to improve and innovate, but that almost always just gets swamped by all the other demand and all the other things that are going on in the organization. So what you hit for me, Dan, was, a lot of these characteristics and a lot of these anti-patterns we see in organizations that we've seen for a long time, whether it's through agile transformation, other types of digital transformation, are definitely going to be, something that we need to consider when we're talking about AI adoption.
Yeah,
Agreed.
One thing I'll throw in here to maybe close out the governance conversation is I go back to our tagline: rethink, rework, rewire. That applies here so perfectly. Rethink, what does governance mean in the age of AI? Because if you're trying to apply your traditional IT governance to the things you're trying to do with AI, they're probably not fully aligned in terms of the goals, what you're trying to accomplish. And so just plugging everything AI into your existing IT governance model is probably going to have any number of gaps that are going to cause pain points. So rethink that. And again, look at what are the things you can rework about governance. How can you streamline? Don't strip out things that add risk back for your organization, but strip out the things that slow your organization down. And, once you've kind of worked your way through that, that's where the rewiring your governance. It's, how does this work? How are we going to work together as an organization? And I think by taking that approach, you're going to help remove a lot of the inertia.
Yeah, I'll cap that. I agree, Randy. I'll cap that with, I also believe governance is an easy scapegoat, right? It's really easy to just point to that and say, we'd be doing all sorts of things, but, right? And I think that's a bit of a cop-out. And I think, more so than in recent years, this phenomenon of AI is going to be really striking at the competitive advantage for organizations. If you want to stay competitively in your market, if you want to keep that advantage, you've got to be serious about this. And you can't just, allow something like governance to get in the way. Just invite those people into the conversation, make them part of the process. And I think we can move forward on things. So what about the lack of an aligned strategy?
I can jump in here, Richard. One of the things I've noticed in dealing with organizations that don't have a lot of muscle memory around implementing new technology, specifically around implementing AI, which has some unique elements that are helpful to keep an eye on, is a lot of these programs are initiated by board members asking questions of leadership. And so it's kind of an afterthought, we got to do this because so-and-so asked about it, which becomes an experiment that isn't prioritized and isn't funded and isn't looked at, across the organization as an imperative. Or sometimes from marketing, because their customers in the marketplace is asking what the strategy is around AI. So those initiatives often fall flat just because of a few things. One, there's no vision for the organization to back up those initiatives, even if you're doing small steps. I think it's important to be able to state what the purpose of implementation of AI or adoption of AI is, get buy-in across the leadership of an organization, have a way to measure it with KPIs. This goes into data and general, governance, and properly allocate, maybe 10 or 15% of the group involved in implementation, 10 or 15% of their time dedicated to this. But that data governance, or just data and security governance of AI implementation, needs to enforce those things. And that's why I think the vision and the buy-in from all executives is crucial to success.
Yeah, and you referenced earlier, Dan, about the business, and that's we've seen that over the years with agile adoption. If it gets kind of siloed, anchored in IT, when it's really about the business. And I think AI, you mentioned that earlier, and I agree. So when you're talking about getting those leaders and getting that vision, what's missing, you think, or what's something that organizations can do in terms of making sure that they're casting a bigger net? And making sure they're bringing in leaders across the organization, not just technology leaders.
I'll tee up a good one for you, Randy. I think one of the things that is often underestimated is the cultural impact or need for a cultural adoption around AI. The productivities. I mean, I think this morning there was a release of non-farm corporate productivity. I'm looking it over. It was 5.7% productivity gain, 7% increase in output, and hours worked up 1.2%. So I don't know if you could contribute all of that to AI, but it certainly smells of improved productivity through automation, which AI is excellent at. But this isn't an IT project. This isn't a cost center. This is a competitive imperative, because if you do not start down this path, there'll be an upstart of 3 or 4 people that do your business function or corporate function cheaper and faster within the next 3 to 5 years. But often the cultural elements are not addressed in the changes that are needed in mindset and approach to these things, which Randy always speaks much better on this than I do. So I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah. When it comes to culture, I like to start with it's a reflection of the values of the organization. What do we value? What are the behaviors that are accepted and get rewarded in the organization? And we've probably all seen and been in organizations where I love this word and I hate it at the same time. I know what it means. I don't know that everybody necessarily has a definition, but the concept of theater, right? There's a lot of action. There's a lot of motion. When we're in that critical meeting with senior leaders and they're like, hey, the board member wants to know, what are we doing with AI? Everybody's quick with their AI stories. And if you just peek under the hood a little bit, you're like, there's no engine under the hood. Like, you're doing a bunch of stuff that at a surface level sounds great, but what are you really driving towards? And so how do we create 2 things? How do we make it safe to have the conversation that says, look, I can go do any number, 37 different things related to AI and talk about it all day long and sound like I'm super busy, but what's really important? And how do we get people in the organization aligned to, there's 1 or 2 big needles, on the organizational performance scorecard, as it were, that we're trying to move, and let's rally around that. One of the things, I would say this is red flag number 1 is you just, walk the proverbial halls of an organization and ask middle management, what are you doing with AI? And if the majority of your answers are, I'm using Copilot to do email stuff and I'm using Copilot to take minutes for meetings, you're screwed.
Well, let me come to the defense of those often maligned middle managers real quick. So let me challenge that a little bit, Randy. So I think you could view that as, well, if that's, if you think that's all you need to be doing, you may be screwed. But it could also be, that's a nice first step, right? So there's a bit of a paradox here that we have to carefully straddle, particularly when we're talking with middle managers, because I do think they're often maligned and they got a lot working against them in some cases. But I think the conversation, and going back to culture and everything else we've been talking about so far, it needs to be, okay, you're doing that as a starting point. What are you learning from that? Right. And then getting back to strategic alignment, all right, how does that align to our overall strategy? And where do we go next? So I think if you take something like that in isolation, yes, there could be some questions there. But I think if you frame it in the right way, and if you do bring in kind of your cultural awareness and make sure that you've got that alignment, you could potentially turn that around. Now, I've started leaning in about 1.5 years ago, almost 2 years ago, for myself, because I'm not a software developer. I haven't written code in a lot of years. So a couple of years ago, my idea of AI was, yes, that's an IT thing. It's technology. I'll just reap the benefits at some point down the line. I eventually pretty quickly got to realize, well, no, I need to educate myself. I need to start sharpening my skills. And so, maybe you touched a little bit of a trigger for me, because that's what I've been doing. I've been playing with, the simple tools for myself, but it's allowing me to learn and to go deeper. So I do think there's an opportunity there to recognize at least the effort, but then if it's not tied to that strategy, then I think that's where you might have a problem, because then it's just something that's being done in isolation and it's surface level.
I do want to clarify something that I said. I said if you walk the proverbial halls, talk to middle managers, and the majority of their AI stories are around using Copilot for email and meeting minutes and meeting management, that you're screwed. That statement, the implication there is that stuff's all table stakes, that you should have figured that out by now. It doesn't mean if you're doing that, stop doing it. Like, you should be doing that all the time, and that should have become regular practice. And my hope would be that, you're starting to move beyond that. But I as always, Richard, I appreciate your balancing perspective with my hyperbolic perspective.
Got to keep it real, man.
Something a little bit, further around culture, I don't know where I got this stat. 80% of projects are behind or fail when legal and compliance are involved. Now, there's certainly, they should be a part of the process, but they shouldn't be a blocker to the process. I've been a part of organizations where it's the mentality, the culture is win at all costs. Some better organizations I've been a part of is, win at proportional costs. I would suggest more of a lean startup approach, mindset to this, which is often dubbed as fail fast, which I like to term as learn fast.
Yeah.
Failure is a part of the process. Do not discourage or penalize for forming a hypothesis on how AI can further your business or increase productivity. Implement that and fall on your face and learn from it. That is okay. That's a part of the maturity model. But organizations that have a culture of zero tolerance for failure are going to struggle in implementing in this and implementing AI for the productivity that it could bring to their organization.
Yeah, for sure. So there were other blockers that we explored through the poll. I think the two that we've talked about certainly took the majority of the votes. So we talked a little bit on that, but how could we talk about, or how could you share your perspective, Dan, on that relationship of being strategic, the strategic alignment that we need, and so-called governance? That seems to be, if we can find the balance there, that seems to be an opportunity to create a really good foundation for organizations to go further than those table stakes.
Yeah, I mean, this is not too dissimilar to any type of technology adoption, although there are some key areas that you want to focus in on. But I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. This has to have a stated vision. That vision has to have adoption and agreement from key executives. It actually helps if you have an executive be the executive sponsor of these types of programs. Those result in measurable KPIs. I remember for almost a decade spending upwards of 2 hours a day looking for information across the organization for execution of my job, putting together KPIs or operational metrics. Were usually done on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. If you're doing that on a quarterly basis, it's a half year between when you say what you want to do, when you get some KPIs and you adjust and you can measure those. A lot of these tools can instrument your KPIs so you're getting them real time. So you're on a 24-hour cycle of change to adjust. Those KPIs really do need a data and a security or an AI implementation governance board that has some teeth. Again, everybody's bought in and there's a vision. And, lastly, you have to, really look at your data and how to instrument your data in a secure way. And those don't sound too dissimilar from any technology adoption, but for some reason, a lot of companies do not put in the concentrated, prioritized effort here. And it can start at 5 or 10% of your resources. But I bet you if you start with, 5 or 10% of your resources, you're going to get out of it 20, 30, 40% productivity gains.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. The idea of productivity gains, I think part of what might be driving some of the resistance from a governance or a security perspective, or even an ethical perspective, is this concern of, obviously automation suggests that people may be losing their jobs, and that's certainly a risk with AI. I saw a statistic that the majority, I think 40% of job loss risk is actually in the white collar kind of knowledge worker space. And that's certainly a risk, but the idea of augmentation, right? Using AI to augment what we're doing, again, creating some balance to that approach. I think that is probably an underlying concern or risk factor that's sitting there with, whether it's leaders trying to figure out how to get their strategy tied into execution, or again, there's maybe some blocker because we haven't checked all of those compliance boxes yet. But I think, you shared some obvious automation opportunities, but there's also the ability to look at it from an augmentation perspective. So how can we up level our talent through AI, not just about kind of making everybody more productive or even reducing headcount?
I'll answer it this way. I think that the productivity is not a sign of decrease in personnel. It doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be. Most AI still needs a human in the middle, but AI can help concentrate what you really bring to the table, which is your wisdom, your taste, your connection with others within the organization and customers, and the communication around that. But my experience, and even running my own businesses, as my organization or my company gets more and more productive, that money goes back into the business. I don't just take it off the table. So this level of productivity, or this productivity wave that's coming our way, I wouldn't look at that so much as displacing workers as it would be increasing the investment into the organization, doing more with what you have than displacement of those resources.
Yeah, I want to chime in on that point, because the one challenge that I have seen every client I've ever worked with is they have a situation where they have more work to do than they have capacity. And they're trying to do way too much. Sure, they have a cut line, but the cut line's probably 30, 50% beyond what their actual capacity is. And now we've got an opportunity to actually use AI to help increase our capacity. And one of the sort of befuddling dynamics is, well, we like needing to do more work than we have capacity, so we're gonna let some people go, so we still have that problem. Like that's
I mentioned this earlier, and I've read this stat that 2 hours a day is of any knowledge worker is spent searching for information internally. At a 10-hour day, that's a 20% potential productivity gain. Yeah. And what that allows, knowledge workers to do is concentrate their value. We all get frustrated with repeated tasks and busy work. That's a part of our job, but that decreases and you can concentrate on the essence of your value and the essence of your job. Your appreciation and enjoyment of that job will go up, and it actually helps you to think different about your role in an organization, think different about your customer, and concentrate your focus on what matters most.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. So, when we talk about, this is a big topic, and blockers are certainly important. So we know the conversation is going to continue. Any final thoughts before we close out on, where do we go from here? Or, Dan, if you want to share a little bit about what you're doing with your AI product guild.
Yeah, I'm a longtime product manager or product executive. A lot of what I spend time at an enterprise organization as I'm building and launching products is fine-tuning the internal factory from ideation through to development, deployment. Usually the product owners don't own that organization across different departments, but it's it really comes down to what the weak link in the chain that prevents flow. A lot of what I'm doing now is trying to understand or figure out what is the essence of what a product leader does, and what are the tools that could automate the things that AI is good at, and have the orchestration on top of that, but not just for product, for marketing, for development, so at the moment, a small group of us are doing 2-week sprints, using AI to augment the process of building and launching products. And we're getting down to the level where we can have an idea on Monday and that Friday have a minimum viable product, and by the following Friday have some validation whether we want to scale that product in market or not. And so we're exercising that on a 2-week cycle and learning every time. And some of that is just continual tool development as we're going. The idea is not to take out the repetitive work in that process, but also just to exercise the latest and greatest tools through that cycle, so this guild that I'm a part of can expedite from idea to outcome much faster than a traditional organization that doesn't use or leverage these tools.
Nice.
Yeah, so if you're interested in building that capability inside your organization, reach out to Dan.
Yeah. And, Randy and I have, we also do workshops to help organizations from, maturity level 0 to 1, or from 1 to 3, or 3 to 5, depending on where they are. There's, the lessons learned and the work that we've done together, I think has allowed us to create a framework that we can help other organizations, get through this process and embrace it more successful.
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and jump in, Richard, and build on that as we kind of close out here. That was a good tee up, Dan, for what we're doing with the learnings that we're experiencing, and how we're packaging that into tools and ways to take stock of your current landscape and understand what are the blockers that you're experiencing. Because like the top 3 things that came out of our poll: governance, strategy, data. None of these are technology problems per se. They're organizational problems, and they're solvable. And so that's really where we come in. Is sure, there are technology challenges, but the organizational challenges we find are actually the biggest blockers to effectiveness and really delivering impact. So in 2.5 weeks, Tuesday, September 23rd, I think is the date, we're running a micro course, Unblocking AI, the 6 hidden blockers holding your organization back. And we will go through, it's a 2-hour micro course. It's focused on how do you assess the lay of the land in your organization? What symptoms are you looking for? What are they indicative of in terms of what blockers or what combination of blockers exist? What are the tactics that you can take to help kind of unblock those things that might be slowing you down or in your way? And I know, like, when we start talking about governance, and in prior conversations, I've talked a lot about operating model. Probably a lot of folks are like, I don't have the keys to any of that. Well, that doesn't matter. Like, the things that we're focusing on, it doesn't matter where you sit in the organization. Our focus is, how do we help you control the things that you can control? And how do we help you position the right conversations so that the keys to those things hopefully ultimately become more shared and more participative? That's really the ultimate goal that we're after. So we'll post a link to the Eventbrite page for that micro course coming up here the last week in September, and hope to see a lot of folks there.
Yeah,
It's
great.
gonna be fun.
Yeah, so thanks, guys. This was a great conversation. So once again, thanks for joining our episodes of Optimizing Live. And if you're interested in checking out the workshop, just follow us on LinkedIn or go to our page on optimizingforimpact.com. Thanks, everybody. Good luck on your AI adoption efforts.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dan.
Pleasure.